Violence against women and girls cuts across age, socioeconomic, educational, geographic, and other boundaries. We also know that the existence of a strong women's movement is one of the greatest contributors to strong laws and services for women. The women's movement of today has built on its past, and it continues to be vibrant, dynamic, and steadfast in its call for a more inclusive and a more just world. We have such an inspiring panel here with us today of strong women from different generations and backgrounds who have dedicated themselves to this fight and contributed to advancing the cause of women and girls. I'd like to start this conversation with Ms. Catherine Rolang. Your organization, Women United Together, Marshall Islands, has really been a leading voice breaking the silence on violence against women in your country. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do. And I would like to request that we don't read statements if we can make this more of a conversation.
Thank you, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. This event is very fitting for us as we launched this Spotlight initiative back home, where today exactly we're marking the first successful year of our Violence Against Women and Girls Support Service. And we're very proud of that. It's the first ever service for the Marshall Islands and for the North Pacific, really. We recently did a study. Thank you. We recently did a study on values and attitudes toward violence against women and girls, and the results were very hard-hitting. However, I think it gave us a greater understanding of how people, both women and men, really thought about this issue and how they continue to justify violence against women and girls.
What were some of the things that were said? What were the results?
Just that, women deserve to be raped because of how they were clothed or what they were saying and how they were seeking attention from men and, from men. And I think this is the reality. This is what we need to understand, that these are coming from both men and women, from both boys and girls, that they think this is okay. And we need to really understand this and figure out a way to shift this social change, to define these issues and devise strategies to address it.
And how would we shift that social change? What are some of the things we can do to counter those negative stereotypes?
I think we really need to target young people who are still molding their perceptions and their values toward violence against women. As a young person myself, I really believe that if I hadn't started working around this issue at a young age, I probably would have been, today, I probably would have justified this as well. Because as a young person in the Marshall Islands, these are the things that we're taught as young girls, that it's not okay, or that it's okay that violence occurs, that we are experiencing violence because we're girls, because we're women, because of the way we dress, how we speak, and I think that's really important.
Gloria Steinem, you are a leading figure of the feminist movement. You have spent decades working on promoting women's rights. You've seen this journey, you've seen the progress, and you've also seen some pretty devastating backlash. When you reflect on what you're hearing today and what some of the lessons we're learning in the Marshall Islands and what we can take away, what do you think we need to do the most right now?
Just a little question.
Just 30 seconds. I'm teasing.
Well, I would like to remind us of two basic things, which I think helps us to know what we need to do the most. One is that this is all about controlling reproduction. If we did not have wombs, we would be fine. Okay? And that is the first step in pretty much every hierarchy. It was not always the case that for most of human history, females controlled our own bodies. We decided when and whether to have children. That was the balance of power. The paradigm of society was a circle, not a pyramid. It's not human nature to be the way we are. We invented gender. We invented race. It's deep, I know, but we can disinvent what we have invented.
But how do we do that?
Okay, well, one way I think that's crucial is to understand that this is not a side event here. This is the whole thing. right here. Because the biggest indicator of whether a society is violent in itself, in its own streets and so on, or whether it will use military violence against another nation, is not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion, or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. That is what we see first, that dominance and violence. It normalizes the idea that one group has a right to control other groups. It is the beginning of the hierarchy, and therefore it is the most fundamental. I mean, I'm so grateful to the European Union and to the European Women's Lobby for this, finally some attention to what is the root and the basis of all other violence on earth. I've been looking at this bird over here, okay? We have to remember the human race is a bird with two wings, and if one is broken, no one can fly. This is the basis of everything else that goes on in the United Nations.
What are some of the practical things that people in this audience can take away and do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in a practical way, if we're doing something and 50% of it isn't about women, what's wrong with it? Secondly, and in a very practical way, I think we need to remember that people who are experiencing the problem know the answer way better than somebody on top. So the question is, how does this money get to the ground in small sums, in groups controlled by women who know what the problem is and what to do about it? I mean, I have just been part of a great group of, a long-distance part of a great group of women in the DRC who, with great courage, came from a meeting to a meeting from every province in the DRC with enormous courage to talk about their role in the peace process. They need support. It's not so easy to do that because it happens that the president is not so interested in elections, and so it's harder for international groups. But we can figure out how to do that, right? So to get support to women on the ground who know what's wrong and what to do about it way better than experts up there. Every time I hear, can it be scaled up, I know we're in trouble, right? Trust the judgment of the people who are on the ground who are experiencing it, and be willing to trust groups that know how to give money in small sums.
Priyanka Chopra, you have been a UNICEF ambassador for several years. You have proven that you are passionate about children's rights. You've been a strong advocate for ending sexual violence against girls. Give us a sense of some of the work that you've done. What are some of the approaches that you think have been most effective?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This incredible panel of women that are so inspiring. I've worked with UNICEF now for about 12 years, and mostly with education and rights for children. Whether it was my travels around India, Jordan, recently to the Zatari camp, with Syrian refugees, whether it was Zimbabwe, where the numbers are staggering. 1 out of 3 girls under 18 has been sexually violated. 100%. South Africa. Violence comes out in so many forms, whether that's sexuality, whether that is physical violence, emotional violence. The one thing that I have seen that usually works within communities is to be able to empower women and young girls, giving them the right to tell them it is okay, especially in developing countries like you were speaking, ma'am, right now, about if a girl wears a certain outfit, she's judged for it and she asked to be raped. Or if a girl hits puberty, she will not be allowed to go to school anymore because she might be raped. Or it might, and that will bring honor that will bring dishonor to the family. These are certain little things that are set in mindsets which have been for thousands of years been told to us as women, that we dictate our intention or everything that we want to achieve by the clothes that we wear, or the way that we speak, or how loudly we speak, or what point we're trying to make. So what has worked is empowering these young girls and boys in schools, by telling them that a real man is not violent and a real woman is not tolerant of it. Because what happens is society tells boys that it's okay to be violent, and then women just become tolerant. And when these girls are empowered, I've seen so many kids that I have met who go into their own communities, and despite of being ousted, despite of being told that they're too much women and they're bad influences, and they will probably, turn the other girls into bad influences, they go out there, knock on doors, and make the change. So we need to start young. We are not going to be able to change the mindsets of older people, unfortunately.
And starting young, how do you get girls and boys to be more engaged in this fight, both girls and boys?
Well, again, I think, the fact that everyone sitting in this room, they are people who are influencers, governments, people in higher positions and platforms. Once you, like in India, for example, we have incredible laws that have been passed for the protection of women, which local and international communities have pushed the government to do. And now implementation is what is important. You see young people with the use of social media, with the use of being aware, socially aware, by parents teaching their children, by making them, like how Malala's father addressed us, and he said, my father was exactly the same. He told me that no one will ever tell you to not have an opinion, because that's the one thing that's taken away from a woman, is her opinion and her right. And my father empowered me to be able to sit in front of you and say anything that I want from my experiences. And it's that with the internet, with the social media that we have, it can become something which is horrible, but it can also become a boon by us being able to. These kids are dictating and teaching themselves. We're not going to be able to tell them this is how life is led. They're discussing it on their own. They're on their phones, they're on Facebook, whether I was at this Dari camp, whether I was in Rajasthan in India, whether I was in Zimbabwe. So the access and the information that we provide to them is very important. And UNICEF and so many other NGOs and amazing organizations are doing such great groundwork, which you said, going into the field and actually changing mindsets.
And with the groundwork and the mindsets, I'd like Jayathma to weigh in on this. She's the recently appointed envoy of the Secretary General on youth and has had considerable experience working with grassroots organizations. What do you think are some of the key issues going forward today?
Yes, definitely. Before going into the topic, I just want to state how personal this topic is. Growing up in Sri Lanka, every day going to school, going to university, I have experienced violence in the form of harassment in public transportation. And now that I live in New York, and when I walk on the roads, sometimes I think how free I am from that type of harassment. But it also keeps me awake at night to think how my little sisters might be, what my little sisters might be going through back at home. So this is a very personal topic, and I commend very much the partners who came through together to bring this forward. And on the specific question of how we engage young people in this initiative, the first one for me would be to mobilize as much as young people we can to educate their peers, because young people learn from their peers very much, other than having it being said by any other partner. So I would really encourage young people to talk to their peers and encourage and raise awareness on this issue. I saw in a report that was launched a few years ago by UNFPA, UN Women and UNDP and some other partners together, that close to 70% of young women are actually justifying the sort of violence that they are going through. So it is our responsibility to educate our sisters and to stand in solidarity with them in this fight, because sometimes they might not be as strong as we are to fight back. And the second one would be to, as you said, young people today are using social media to a greater extent to talk about these issues that were considered taboo before. And I would also encourage you very much to hold your governments accountable using social media. Call your governments out. Ask them what they're doing. Ask them what they're doing to implement the CEDAW. Ask them what they're doing to implement Beijing Plus 20. Hold them accountable. Don't ever be discouraged that the governments are not doing anything. Don't ever give up on government. Always hold them accountable. Our generation is one of the most connected generations in history, and our generation is more progressive than the generation before. I think it has always been like that. Every new generation is forward-looking and progressive than the one before. But the challenge is that this is an incremental change, and we do not want this incremental change because we don't know how long it's going to take for things to change. And we need our generation to be the first generation that ends this horrifying concept, this horrifying scenario. And we should get together as young people to fight against this.
And briefly, Jayathma, as we conclude this panel, what should be our greatest takeaway from today?
From today, I think there is a need to listen to young people more. We always talk about youth participation in policy making, Madam Executive Director. You know this very closely, and I would really encourage, when you implement this initiative on the ground, to also consult young people. Have young people as your advisors in this project. Have them as your implementing partners, youth organizations, youth-led organizations as your implementing partners, because they are the people who are going through this violence, and they are the people who can be a part of the solution as well.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to leave our discussion there for time, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their insights, their ideas on how we can come together and really reach out to those groups on the ground that can make things happen and learn from one another so that we achieve the results that we want. Thank you very much once again. It's my pleasure now to end this by introducing